Hello and welcome to the week that really was with John McGurk and Sarah Ryan for this week of Valentine's Day, ending the 16th of February 2024. Sarah, I really don't know if I should be starting the podcast because I think I'm out of date. Maria Walsh announced this week that men like me in sort of our 40s and so are male, pale and stale and should make way for, I think, people like you. So maybe moving forward, you can start the conversation rather than me.
Well, that's nice of her, isn't it? I forgot she existed, so that shows how instrumental she's been. She obviously needed the publicity, but I think that the comments about men being pale and stale and all that is actually the thing that's pale and stale and overdone. I mean, this thing of men are useless and men, I think we'll look back on this period. I've said it loads of times on the podcast. Maria Walsh is not the one going out on a pole to restore electricity when there's a storm. She's not the one going out into the high seas to fish for things. She's not laying cement or tar on the roads, etc., etc. So it's very convenient for her to talk about, where she does and doesn't want men to be visible to her. But frankly, she's just another example of if the roles were reversed, somebody who'd fit in very well in, kind of 1950s Catholic Ireland when it came to women, that she wants people of the opposite gender to not, to be seen and not heard. And I think it's bullshit. And I think it's, a desperate attempt to get some publicity for herself a few months out from the European elections, for whatever reason that might be. And I think it's offensive. It is offensive. If a man stood up as an MEP and said there were too many women in anything or anywhere like that, there would be calls for resignations. But she's hip and cool, and so she can say things like that.
Well, I'll give you my opinion on her in a second, but just to say to the listeners, we're obviously not going to get a full hour out of Maria Walsh because she's not that interesting. We're also going to talk in a little while about Michael McDowell and Roderick O'Gorman and the ongoing rise about the referendum. We're going to talk about the cost of the National Children's Hospital, and we're going to talk about Simon Harris wanting to bring people home. But back to this issue of Maria Walsh. I mean, do you know what? I heard it almost didn't register with me, Sarah, because, as you say, it's so boring, it's so common. But more than anything else, I just think you've got some nerve. You got elected to the European Parliament in 2019, which was the last time we had European election. You tootled off to Brussels for 5 years. Nobody heard sight nor light of you since.
Yeah.
You did everything. You lived the life. You had all the perks of being an MEP. Now you've flit back to Ireland, and your first contribution to Irish politics since you got elected is to slag off other candidates for being men. And I mean, is this supposed to impress me? Am I supposed to vote for you because you're a woman? It's. Do you know, we talked, I think, on this podcast a couple of weeks ago about the increasing polarization between young men and women, and we talked about that whole thing about, how women are going to the left and men are going to the right. This is a perfect example of why I don't want to be represented by that. I actually have no objection. I mean, I have no objection to be represented by people I disagree with. For example, Deirdre Clune is retiring for Fine Gael in Ireland South, of the Cork Barry family. She's been an MEP, I think, for about 10, 15 years. And I wouldn't agree with her on much, but I think she's been a fine, respectable, decent MEP who has never given me any cause to be offended by anything she's done. I might have disagreed with her votes, but this is just no. Do you know, that would drop her, Maria Walsh, from me. I don't vote in her constituency, but I did. It would drop her from like a 4 or 5 on my preference right down to the very bottom. Because just go away.
But
do something first.
But you don't want to be associated. You don't want to be represented. But I'm a woman, and neither do I. I mean, you're absolutely right that there's people, and this is, in my experience, much more a characteristic of people who are, I would call myself centre right, but we're called far right by everybody else, if you know what I mean. It tends to be more of a characteristic of us, in my experience, than the rest of them, which is that I'm able to respect and talk to, be friends with, and have time for people that I don't agree with. It's nothing to do with that. It's to do with the behavior. And it's funny because lots of things are starting to come full circle in the last couple of years. And one of them is that I used to hate the some of these kind of hip, cool expressions like check your privilege, but check her privilege to feel the confidence and to not have fear any kind of repercussions for standing up like that and utterly alienating her colleagues. But also, we would expect a huge percentage of people who actually gave her their first preference vote. Like, it's the immense privilege of feeling protected enough by your standing in this current woke hip society that you can say something like that. If Maddie McGrath stood up and said an equivalent about the female members of the parliament, he'd be probably stoned to death in a nearby side street to Leinster House. So I think it's garbage. I think it's a desperate attempt to get publicity. I think it's offensive. I think it's not just offensive to men. I think it's offensive to women, because I don't want to be associated with that kind of thinking. I'm I don't want my sons to grow up in a world where people like that. It's like my sons are male. Are they supposed to just cower in the sidelines because of people like her? I mean,
the other thing is, you say about it being check your privilege and boring now. I mean, just to put this in context, in 2020, you probably don't remember this, but in 2020, in August of 2020, during the pandemic, Lynn Boylan, who was a Sinn Féin candidate for something or other at the time, she had a go at the Fine Gael front bench being full of, quote, middle-class white men, and said that they wouldn't have an understanding of the perspective of a traveller, somebody who's uneducated, somebody from the Roma community. The law doesn't treat middle-class white men the same. And Sarah, I don't know if you remember the outrage that came from Leo Varadkar at that. He actually sent a tweet about it. He said, if you're white, male, or even worse, middle class, Sinn Féin doesn't want you. So much for, quote, Ireland of equals. And then Barry Ward, who's a Fine Gael senator, he piled in as well. And he said he was disappointed by that kind of attitude about middle class white men. Absolutely nothing to say when it's their own party colleague trotting out the same tired, boring old claptrap. Nothing to say. The hypocrisy of it is stinking. And anyway, I don't think it's going to do her any good, because it's a bad constituency, Ireland Northwest, to be complaining about white middle class men. There's a lot of them in it.
Well, I mean, but like I said, and I say it about Leo, said it about Micheál, when you're the Taoiseach, when you're the Taoiseach, when you're the MEP, you're the MEP representing everyone, not just the people you like and agree with. So if she's not even prepared to represent, she might as well go home.
Do you not think this goes to the leadership issue, though, in the government? Because I guarantee you that if somebody had said something like that when John Bruton, God rest him, or Charlie Haughey, God rest him, were leading their respective parties, they would have been slapped down publicly. I mean, where was Varadkar saying, look, Maria Walsh's comments are out of line, they don't represent the views of the Fine Gael party, and she should withdraw them? Like, call your MEP, call your candidate back into line. Show the voters something that actually this doesn't represent you, because your silence says this is how you all feel. You tolerate this sort of stuff. I mean, so it's not just her that is damaged by this. It's the entire Fine Gael brand. Because why, if this is the kind of attitude that's tolerated towards people like me by that party, why should I ever vote for it? And I know this will surprise listeners, but I've never been hugely hostilely disposed towards Fine Gael. I've voted for them in the past. They would probably get a middle ranking, decent, not a number one or a two, but a decent preference off me in an election. But not anymore. This is just offensive.
I love the way you kind of place, you like, in the nicest way, you kind of value your vote so much that you place kind of, some significant kind of considerable weight behind, like a fourth preference or a fifth preference.
I do, because I tend to vote for no hopers. So sometimes a number 4 for me is as good as a number 1.
Pretty good, yeah.
So but I also do think that is important, and I mean, I can tell you from having been a candidate, and you know this as well, a lot of times when people tell you on the doorsteps they'll give you a vote, they mean you're getting a number 7.
Oh, for sure. But I also think that if you've been a candidate or you've been involved in politics and you've been in enough counts, you've seen people be elected on a couple of 6s and 7s. Really, really hate someone. I always say to people, you leave it blank. You don't give them anything.
And as our mutual friend Jason O'Mahony always says, and this is relevant coming up to the election, if you really, really want to keep somebody out, you don't want to see them getting elected, then you vote for literally everybody else on the ballot paper.
Yeah.
You can use your vote that way, because then your preference is always available to whoever's opposing. But anyway, we might do something about how to use your vote closer to polling day. There's no need to do it for the referendum because that's easy. That's just yes or no. But for the European and local elections, we might do something about how to use your vote.
On this, I would say, I think that what you're seeing there, you're absolutely right. And it's not just a Fianna Gael thing, it would have been a Fianna Fáil thing as well, that, you know, people who spoke out would be publicly slapped down or whatever. And I think that something is happening in both parties, which you have a type of lame duck leader in that they don't have the political, what's the word? They don't have the political clout almost within their own parties to use up to do that. They don't have the clout to reprimand people publicly. They don't have the clout to you know, get people to say or do or not say or do things anymore. And certainly in Micheál's case, you know, Micheál is like the party is effectively a way in which he's, you know, advancing his own personal ambitions. So, you know, he's not going to rock the boat by some random MEP saying, I know she's Fine Gael, but you get my point. And I don't think Leo is terribly dissimilar. I mean, Fine Gael have, and by the way as well, like in a week where like Leo's having his 9th, is it, TD saying that he's not running? Like Leo has bigger problems than Maria.
He does.
And so
they're also going to select Josepha Madigan apparently as their candidate in Dublin, so he's got bigger problems again.
Why do you think that's a problem?
I'm not a Josepha Madigan. I'm not convinced by her. You know, if she was a football player and Manchester United signed her, I wouldn't be expecting much. Put it that way. I mean, this is somebody who Leo Varadkar himself unceremoniously demoted from the cabinet and has been in no rush to take back. So she's not good enough to sit at the cabinet table, but she's good enough to represent the country in Europe. I'm not convinced.
Well, I think that because I was actually looking at it just the other day out of interest, and I think like the last European elections in Dublin, if you look, like the quota was about 72,000. The 4th seat was taken by Barry Andrews without having reached the quota at about 51. Kieran Cuff took the 1st seat for Green Party, and then in the middle was Frances Fitzgerald and Claire Daly. I think that election is wide open. I wouldn't be confident. Now, obviously, Frances Fitzgerald isn't herself running, but I wouldn't be confident for any of them going. If I was any of those people going in, I wouldn't be very confident. No. Like that thing is wide open. So, I mean, like we could talk about that again close to the time, but I think that Fine Gael have a number of problems within the party, problems with the leadership, problems with people not running. And on the one hand, you know, this is a kind of a small fry problem that his MEP is coming out and saying this kind of stuff. But on the other hand, it goes to the heart of what's the problem there. And the problem there is being offensive to your voters by chasing some kind of woke ideology that you think people care about, and not having the leadership authority to smack it back down and stand for something.
The last thing I'll say on this before we move on is that, of course, the standard Fine Gael voter in this country is a middle-class white man.
Yeah,
that's their base. That's who votes for them. That's what the party has become. That apparently middle-class white men are personas non grata. Anyway, to somebody else who's a persona non grata is, well, as far as Michael McDowell is concerned, Roderick O'Gorman and the entire cabinet in relation to the referendum. He has been, I've rarely seen Michael McDowell as angry as he is this week. I mean, he's basically openly calling the government liars in their Yes campaign. In an interview he did with Ben Scallon on Gript, but also elsewhere on social media, he's been he's quite worked up. And I think it's really significant because whatever else you might say, Sarah, about Michael McDowell, he's not what you'd call a radical. He's a member of the Irish political establishment in very good standing. He's a former Minister for Justice. He's a former Attorney General. He's a columnist for the Irish Times. He's a very senior lawyer. If somebody like that is really close to losing their temper with the government over their referendum campaign, I think that's quite significant. And it's not surprising because they've been lying through their teeth, openly and blatantly. I'll come to that in a second. But first of all, what do you think of the McDowell situation?
I think that, like, for the likes of people like you and me, it's really, really comforting to know that he's there, because, and I would have been in favour of, at one point, in favour of, and I've changed my mind, of abolishing the Seanad. And like, he just proves that that would have been a terrible mistake, because he's doing exactly what he's paid to do, which is calling out the government, and he's getting more and more angry, and he's doing a great job. I mean, I think that, like you said there, like, he's an established kind of long-standing politician. He's been in and out. You know, when my dad was a TD, he was there. He kind of topped the poll, won an election, and then lost the seat the next. But he's got a lot of experience. He's a really good legal mind, and for him to be getting so het up about this kind of thing says a couple of things. It says that the government are, in trouble and not playing this referendum the way they should. But it also shows, and I think it's starting to demonstrate, that Roderick O'Gorman is immensely politically naive. Not that we didn't know that already, but that he's coming up against a kind of a political heavyweight, and it's showing him up.
Mm-hmm.
I think it all goes to bad news for the referendum. I was pleased to see that Michael McDowell is saying in Gript that he thinks it'll be defeated, both of them. I don't know. I haven't met anybody who's voting yes, but I just don't know. But overall, I think Roderick O'Gorman is how do I say this? Very lightweight politically, and I think that's showing more and more. Well, that's the kindest way I could put that.
I'd agree with you on that. I mean, but I think the more significant thing actually is to hell with Roderick O'Gorman, in one sense, because what really angered
and that'll be the title of the podcast: To Hell with Roderick.
We can try. No. We can see. Let's see if I can get that through the censors.
Yeah.
For me, the significance of this week is when the government abandoned all pretense of telling the truth about the referendum. We had 3 verifiable lies from the government in relation to what was happening with these referendums. Number 1, Leo Varadkar came out and he said that concerns about immigration in relation to the family referendum were a quote, red herring. Now, that is flatly false. It is flatly false because not only did his own TD, Neil Richmond, go on television before Christmas.
He started it.
He started it. He's the one who said this will increase the amount of immigration by making family reunification easier. In other words, if you come here from some other country, you can go to the courts and they will say, you don't have to be married to somebody to bring them here as part of your family. If you've got a durable relationship, you might be able to bring more people over. So that's the first instance. That is not only Neil Richmond's view and Michael McDowell's view, but it is also something that the cabinet were told, according to the Irish Independent, at a cabinet meeting in December by their own officials. So unless the Irish Independent got that wrong and the government didn't correct them, the government didn't say, oh no, we weren't told that, the government let that report stand, then that is a blatant lie. Say it's a red herring. If it's serious enough to raise at the cabinet table, it is not a red herring. And the Taoiseach blatantly lied about that. Then you had Catherine Martin, the Minister for Communications, reiterating the lie that the Constitution says that a woman's place is in the home. This is something that her own Electoral Commission, which is headed by Supreme Court Judge Mary Baker, says is absolutely untrue, that the courts have never interpreted the Constitution to mean that a woman's place is in the home. And the third lie is Leo Varadkar said that by voting for the carers amendment, we would put additional legal obligations on the government to protect carers. That is a complete lie, because the wording of the referendum doesn't say the government shall protect carers. It says the government shall strive to protect carers. In other words, it shall try, yea, though it be really difficult, which is not a legal obligation to actually do anything. Because once you go into a court and say, well, we tried, but it's very hard, you've satisfied the Constitution. So, I mean, there's 3 lies in a matter of 2 days from 2 of them from the Taoiseach, 1 of them from the Minister for Communications. And I mean, and these are the same people who will turn around and lecture the rest of us about misinformation and disinformation. It really boils my blood watching it. I very rarely want to shout at politicians, but the shamelessness of this is something else. So I completely relate to McDowell's anger, but I've got plenty of it on my own, I have to say, on this topic. And by the way, just to finish my rant, the clowns that purport to call themselves journalists in this country, in the rest of the media outlets, who will turn around and echo every government concern about the rise of misinformation and fake news and disinformation. When presented with the opportunity to actually challenge it when it's coming from the government, sit stum and say nothing. I mean, to hell, not only with Roderick O'Gorman, but to hell with the whole lot.
Yeah, that's a better title. To hell with a lot of them. Yeah, I mean, so I suppose I have a question, really. You know, the way, like, do you think that, well, you know, you've been involved in different campaigns, and like, neither of us, I don't think, have ever worked in like the Taoiseach's office or whatever. But like, I can imagine that there's an element of chaos to it, especially if they're kind of panicking a bit about the referendum. Do you think that he reads his briefing notes and goes out and makes a mistake in saying that, you know, or do you think he knows that he's not telling the truth?
He knows he's not telling the truth.
Absolutely. So that's the level we're at now.
First of all, I know he knows he's not telling the truth, and we're talking about the Taoiseach here, his statements, because in both of them we have clear evidence that he knew what the truth was. In relation to the claim that the referendum will increase the legal obligations to protect carers, he knows that's not true, because whatever else you might say about him, the man can read the English language. He signed off on the wording of the referendum. He knows it says that the government shall strive to, not that the government shall do. He's the Taoiseach. He has enough basic legal knowledge to know what that means. And his government's lawyers who drafted the wording know bloody well why they put in the word strive and not the word shall. So he absolutely knows that what he's saying is untrue. And in fact, the wording is intended to ensure that it's untrue. And secondly, in relation to immigration, he is the Taoiseach, and we have a report that the Cabinet received a briefing from officials that this would impact immigration. And he's turning around saying it's a red herring. So either he was sleeping during a Cabinet meeting, in which case he should resign because he's the Taoiseach, or he's lying deliberately. And my money is on the latter. So I think he absolutely knows what he's doing. But he also knows that there are enough casual voters out there who don't follow this stuff, who aren't going to go and look up what was said last December, that he can get away with it. And he knows full well that our friends in the press corps, most of whom favour a yes vote, because it's the progressive thing to do, will sit there stum and not risk their chances of getting government advisor jobs after the election. That's my bleak assessment of the situation.
But then I suppose I'll go further. Like, what do you think the impact will be for the government if they get hammered in these two referendums?
Oh, next to nothing.
So why does he care? Like, would you not? Do you know what I mean? Why would he care enough to lie? Am I being terribly naive here? But like, you know, if you're going to lie about something publicly, would you not lie about something that actually had consequence or significance? Like, why would you bother? Like, who cares?
I think it's a tribal thing. One of the things I find very hard these days, wearing sort of journalist hat, is to set that tribalism aside. So I have been trying with Gript constantly to find people to interview or people to talk to who want to advocate for a yes vote. Now, very few of them want to talk to Gript, which is making it difficult. But we're trying because I even though my inclinations about how I'm going to vote in the referendum should be clear to any listener, we have an obligation to try and cover both sides. But I think when you're in politics, tribalism takes over, and I think he looks across the fence and he sees people like David Quinn in the Iona Institute. He sees the people like the Countess who disagree with him on sort of transgender policy. He sees the likes of Michael McDowell, who was, of course, the bane of Fine Gael when he was leader of the Progressive Democrats. And he says, this is tribal and I want to beat these people. I think that's what it's about. And I think that while losing the referendums won't do the government any harm, I think they probably feel with some accuracy that if they can get the referendums passed, then it'll be a crushing blow in terms of morale to sort of the growing wave of opposition to the political establishment growing in the country. It'll be a real, we're in charge, we can do this, screw the rest of you moment. Do you not think?
Yeah, I mean, maybe you're right. It's like a tribalism thing. I mean, I find, like, you're involved in party politics, so was I. I mean, I find, and there's, there's things I agree with, and lots of things I agree with in Fianna Fáil, and lots of things now that I don't. Most of the, there's definitely tribalism, but there's people who just, are mature enough to say, okay, we agree on this and we don't agree on that or whatever. I'm just kind of surprised. I think it's a kind of a pathetic thing to get tribal about, but you might be right because it's the only logical explanation for it. Like, a win is a win, I suppose, for the government, but a loss isn't going to make that much difference, and you would imagine that his efforts would be better spent elsewhere. But yeah, I suppose.
Yeah, a loss has no real consequence for them at all.
No.
And a loss is actually, if I was in the government, I would think a loss, I was thinking strategically, a loss is better for me because a loss kind of, I always think back to the 2002 abortion referendum. I don't know if you remember that. Bertie Ahern, in a nod to the pro-lifers who were a lot stronger than they are today at the time, proposed this referendum to basically X-proof the Constitution. It would have removed suicidality as a ground for abortion. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
And it was one of those where the government did their bit. They campaigned for it. The pro-life campaign and others were delighted and tried to and then the referendum was defeated. And politically, I think, I'm not talking about ethics, morals, anything else here. Politically, I think that strengthened the government of the day because it essentially freed them from an obligation to a lobby group. They were able to turn around to say, and another good example is the way the PR referendum Tories held in England when they came into office with the Liberal Democrats. It let them say, look, we tried your idea, it wasn't popular, you go away now. I think a loss might be better for the government if I was thinking strategically, because it would allow them to say to the likes of the National Women's Council, who've had them by the short and curlies for years, look, we tried your stupid idea, it didn't work, go away and put your head in the sink.
Oh God, if only.
Well, yeah, that's me thinking strategic. I mean, I'm not sure government see it like that. I think they might be afraid of it ticking off from Orla O'Connor.
What a terrifying prospect.
Indeed so. Anyway, we'll talk more about the referendums as we get closer. But one of the things we haven't really done, I got an email request during the week, was to go through and explain in great detail what the referendums will do and what they'll mean. And if you are that person who sent that in that email, I don't really think that's something you're going to get from me and Sarah, because Sarah's a lawyer, I'm not. But you should go and watch the interview with Michael McDowell that's on Gript. He goes through it in some detail as to what the changes proposed are and what he thinks the consequences will be. We have tried to get somebody from the yes side to respond to him. If we do, we'll put that video up, but I'm not optimistic because I'm not entirely sure their position is strong enough to withstand questioning, is my view.
But that's also like a story in and of itself, isn't it? That they won't even put someone forward. Surely you'd want your argument to be put on every possible, platform you could get. But that's the point, isn't it? Only the people we like and agree with we want to talk to. Okay.
Yeah, well, it's going to come back and bite them in the ass eventually over time, I think. Anyway, lest it be said that we criticise the government all the time, Simon Harris wants to bring back a load of Irish builders. That's a good idea, isn't it?
Yeah, sure, why not?
I mean, it is a good idea. That's the first thing to say about it. It is a good idea. And I can't be hypocrite and say it's not, because I've written several times that if you look at the housing crisis in Ireland, Sarah, the issue there is not money. If the government could solve the housing crisis, the government could write a check for, say, 4 billion quid in the morning and solve the housing crisis. They would do it. They would absolutely do it. Problem is they can't, because there aren't the builders to build the houses. And in fact, they're making the problem worse by trying to spend more money, because they're at the moment, all at the same time, they're spending like 3 or 4 billion to rebuild Mica houses in Donegal. They're spending another couple of billion to try and come to my house and insulate it and get me to put in an air pump instead of my oil burner, which isn't happening, but they're trying. And lots of people's houses, they're insulating and upgrading like that. And then they're trying to build 30,000 new houses a year. The issue isn't money. The issue is that you've got 3 government departments bidding against each other for the services of builders and plumbers, and by the way, the private sector then as well, trying to bid. I heard from somebody this week who a couple of years ago had built basically a poultry farm unit for chickens, and at the time it had cost about 400 grand, and he thought about building a second one. Got quoted 1.3 million, and those are like 4 years apart. So that gives you a sense of the cost inflation in construction.
That's absurd.
That's reality. I know this person well. He wasn't fibbing to me. Those are the figures he was quoted. So that gives you a sense of kind of like and it's down to a shortage of labourers, a shortage of materials, all the rest of it. So bringing back workers is actually more important than spending more money. So in fairness to Simon Harris, it is actually a really good idea. It's just, I'm not sure it's something that he's given any thought to beyond, this is a good idea, vote for me.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think anybody who's like planning on having anything done to their house or anything like that, like, has been made aware of the escalating costs. And I know people who work in business in building across different areas, and staffing seems to be a huge problem. So there's nothing wrong with this idea. I think it's just a little bit kind of it's mildly irritating for people, because it's the kind of thing that was being talked about quite a while ago by other people. And, there's an element of Johnny come lately shows up to kind of say, oh, look at this wonderful idea, and it's a day late and a dollar short.
Yeah. Plus, I mean, the other thing here is there's an assumption being made that the construction workers want to come back here, which I think is a bit far-fetched. I'm sure there are some. I'm not saying there's no construction out there worker who wouldn't like to come back to Ireland. But if you left after 2010, 2011, and you went to Australia, for example,
Yeah.
and I actually know a couple of people, not personally, but friends of my brothers, for example, who went to Australia around that time when there was unemployment. There are people with trades. Some of them were carpenters, some of them were stonemasons, so on. Went out there, built a life, met a woman, got married, now very happily living there. Some of them want to come home, but a lot of them don't. Because the standard of living is higher, the taxes are lower, the weather is better. They don't particularly want to come home in the first place. Then you've got guys who went to the Middle East and they're working in Saudi Arabia and paying absolutely no income tax. With a constant supply of work. I mean, Saudi Arabia is talking about building about 3 new cities over the next 30 years. So they have no, they can come home when they've earned all their money and they want to retire. So I'm not sure it's as simple as, just put ads in the Australian papers and tell people they're wanted back home.
No, and it's multifaceted. I mean, I'm 40, and two actually, and particularly of my best female friends went to Australia for periods of time and came back right around the time of kind of there was kind of a juncture where they were like, right, they're both in couples, and they're like, right, are we going to have our kids in Australia, or we're going to have our kids in Ireland? And both decided to come back because they're close to their families and they wanted to be around their families when they had kids. And and both, one in particular, struggled quite a bit with the kind of reintroduction of coming back to Ireland, the cost of everything, the quality of life. They're actually all homeowners now, but for people, like 2 couples, all with good jobs, all kind of moving back in with parents for a prolonged period of time to save up for this or to get this, to get mortgages. It wasn't easy. And so the people who remain behind in Australia that are friends with, they're looking at that and kind of going, well, when you weigh it all up, there's a lot more to it than just, there'll definitely be a job there for me. There's the cost of living, there's the ability to get onto the property market, there's the rental market, there's lots of elements to it. And it's not as attractive as we think.
Yeah, and the other thing is, I mean, this is where I'm going to criticize Simon Harris, because he's had a good idea, but an awful lot of times, and Simon Harris is a great man for this, he'll have a good idea and then he'll just do nothing with it. Because the point is having the idea and telling people you have the idea, and I'll vote for Simon Harris, he said a nice thing.
Yeah, we love the old call. I call for this, and I call on this, and I call. You see loads of people doing it now, especially because there's local and European elections. I call on the government. You're in the government.
Yeah, I'm calling for stuff.
That's me shouting out in my house. I call on someone to make the dinner tonight. Well, yeah, well, it's you.
But yeah, the Irish political system could be you could power the earth with Irish politicians calling for things. I mean, it's basically the full-time job of every county councillor. County councillors don't do anything. They call for other people to do things. That's their number one job. There's a pothole in that road. I call on the county manager to... Yeah.
There's a photo of me pointing at the pothole with a sad face on me.
Yes. That is a classic. There was actually one of those in the local paper in Tipperary last week. Somebody was literally standing there pointing at a pothole. Yeah, it's like public representation. It's not hard if you're willing to debase yourself. Yeah. I mean, there are things we could do. I wrote a piece this week in which I suggested, and I mean, I'm actually serious about this, and I'm not making an anti-Ukrainian point, but if I wanted to bring back builders and Irish people to Ireland to help our construction industry, I would offer them, in addition to whatever they might earn here, for a period of 2 years, the exact same supports that Ukrainians have got. Mm-hmm. That supplement of 250 quid a week or whatever it was, on top of what you're earning. to and perhaps state-funded temporary accommodation for, say, a period of 3 months when you come back, if you want. Like, there should be some incentive, because these are people we actually need in our economy. Now, we are. By the way, I would say that as well for, and this is where people might fall out with me, but I would say that as well for people in the building trade who aren't necessarily Irish. If you have desired skills that we badly need to come here and work, we should support you to do that, because you're helping our economy. At the moment, we are paying lots of people to come here and giving them financial supports who aren't necessarily benefiting the country, because we apparently think it's a kind and decent thing to do. Well, just for once, could we spend that money in a way that actually benefits the rest of society and helps solve the housing crisis? I don't think that's a particularly controversial or out there idea. I'm sure there will be some people, because there always are, who would begrudge it and say, well, why aren't you doing the same for nurses and teachers? The short answer being that we don't have as urgent a need for nurses and teachers. So the government is perfectly entitled, if it wants to.
Yeah, I mean, look, we can go, you can go round and round in circles on that kind of thing. I hate that as well. When you're like, we should invest in X, but sure, there's this, and this. Well, if we do that, we'll never do anything. We just go around in circles pointing out other things. Then, well, no, investing heavily into one area isn't suggesting that everything else is perfect, but you just have to pick something.
Well, it's my biggest bugbear with Irish politicians is that they never actually focus on one thing and do it. Politics ultimately.
But by the way, John, but we saw that there was an ability to do that during COVID.
Oh yeah, when they had no choice, there was.
That was actually the thing that boiled my tits the most about the whole COVID thing, which was, if you'll excuse the expression, but turns out we are actually able to fast track and get things going and work things out when we need to. Why do we only have to be able to do that then?
Yeah. Well, first of all, the actual title of this podcast is going to be Boiled My Tits. But secondly, you're correct. When they were forced to focus on one thing, they had to do it. But, we have this situation in the country where we've got any number of problems and the government can't focus on solving one of them. So there's this constant, we'll split up the pie 15 different ways instead of fixing one problem at a time. And you see this at budget time every year, where there's a little goodie for everybody, instead of actually, taking that money and saying, this year we are going to throw everything we can at health, and we are going to, over the next year, we are going to do what it takes to deliver 1,000 extra hospital beds. Whatever the resources it takes, and see if you can do it. And if you can't, you can't. But at least you've tried. And I think people would respect a government that did that. But instead, it's just constantly kind of it's a fixing potholes country. That's what they do. They fix potholes in every public service, rather than actually reforming.
Or you do exactly what you're saying. I actually somebody told me this horrific story this week about a friend of theirs whose son died by suicide, and it was about he was a teenager and how long he'd struggled to try and get help, and just the waiting list and the mental health services are just not there, and what are you supposed to do? It's not even like a public private thing. There is nowhere to go, and so if the government said, it's not that you're not going to do anything about anything else, but if they said, this year we're going to invest heavily in mental health services, and part of that is going to be a recruitment drive across the world for psychiatrists, and give them perks to move to Ireland for a 3-year period from other countries and try and start offering services to people who are desperate or whatever. But it's 5% to every problem and never 85% to one just leaves problems there gasping for breath all of the time.
Yeah, and politics is ultimately, this is the thing that I want to say. The only reason we have politicians, the only reason we need them, is to make unpopular choices. If politics was just about making popular choices, there would be no need for it, because we could.
Sorry, John, I disagree. We also need them to wish Leaving Cert students good luck on the day.
We do. That's very, very important, and to celebrate International Women's Day. Two other important roles for the politician. But I mean, aside from those two very important things, if politics was just about making easy decisions, we wouldn't need it, because every decision would be universally agreed. Oh, we'll give more money to nurses, more money to the guards, more money to teachers, set the minimum wage at 500 grand an hour, and we'll all live happily ever after. The only reason we have politics is because there's limited resources and multiple problems, and it's up to them to decide which ones to fix. And Irish politicians have completely abrogated that duty. They don't do it. What they do is they try and they try and stop every problem from getting too bad rather than fixing one. Like, I give you an example. And we're going to talk about the National Children's Hospital in a minute. But this extra 500 million that is going to the cost of the National Children's Hospital, if I were running the country, I would scrap it. I would scrap it in the morning. I would say,
you would just go, that's the end of that then.
I would say to hell.
Because I've had this conversation. We'll get to it in a minute. Go on.
But I would put that money into, I would say, what I'm going to do instead is every child with scoliosis in the country is going to get treatment this year. If they're not getting it in Ireland, we're paying to send them to the United States or somewhere else, and we're buying them the treatment they need, because it is a mortal stain on this country that we've got kids with deformed spines who can't get treatment.
Really
I think that would be more popular than what the government is doing.
The scoliosis thing is the kind of thing I would expect to see in a video of a third world country. It
really is. It's the kind, I don't know if they're on every channel, but I watch a lot of Sky Sports, and there are these awful ads, which I think are on most channels, but they're kind of like, kids with terrible eye diseases in Africa, or they're asking for money for Coalition for the Blind or whatever it is. And when I see kids with scoliosis, I think I'm watching one of those ads. I think they should be on an ad being run in Mauritania or somewhere. Please send money to Ireland to help with these kids with scoliosis every 5 minutes.
So unimaginable suffering for the children, but also, I mean, I think anyone who's a parent would understand. Like, I don't think I can imagine a worse torture for me than watching my kid suffer every day because I happen to be unlucky enough to live in a country that hasn't bothered to take the finger out and sort this problem out once and for all. Those children with scoliosis on waiting lists were promised a few years ago.
Mm-hmm. And 2019, Simon Harris, who was then Minister for Health, said that there will be no child waiting more than, I think, 3 months for an operation by the end of 2019.
Yeah. And what I saw a speech given by what's the senator's name?
Tom Clonan.
Yeah, about how one child had become paralysed as a result of the weight.
Yeah, and there's another child, and we've covered his case on Gript, who literally may die because the curvature in his spine is collapsing his lung. And the worst thing about this is that scoliosis, for those of you who don't know, you may have come across it. And it's not just a matter, when it gets to this stage, it becomes very hard to treat, because all of the scoliosis treatments in the world, Sarah, expect to be diagnosed early and treated early.
Yeah.
With things like back braces, and maybe some of them insert a rod in the spine to straighten it up. And
but they expect a level of growth after the fact to kind of.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And when you get to this stage, the treatment becomes 100 times more painful and egregious and debilitating. It is just a national. It's a disgrace.
But that's also true, John, of lots of mental health things. Like there's not, for example, anorexia and bulimia. That's not a person who can wait, in perpetuity until somebody gets around to offering them a bed. That's somebody who'll die in the meantime. Lots of depression and mental health in young adolescents. Those people could die.
Yeah. There are many problems. I was pointing out scoliosis as one, but it's not the only one. But it just strikes me that there is nobody in politics with the balls and the grit and the determination to say, I am going to fix this problem, and I'm not taking no for an answer from my civil servants. There is nobody in politics. Nobody, at least in government. Maybe it's unfair to the opposition because a lot of them haven't had the chance, but I'm not confident. There's definitely no one in government with the sheer testicular fortitude or ovarian fortitude, if you're a feminist, go and say, I'm not taking no for an answer. This is getting fixed. If I've got to send people on planes to the US for treatment at whatever cost, I'm fixing it.
But I will say this, John, right? And I might get a bit of heat for this, but it's something that I, sorry, not sorry, I believe. everything you've just said is right. However, there's another element to this, which is that we, or whoever the electorate of Ireland, also need to grow up a bit about how and why we vote for people. So a lot of people will talk about this, but then they'll punish the person who did come out and was more honest about things. Do you know what I mean? About how long things were going to take, or, who was people who were more dynamic, or who were more, willing to go out on a limb and challenge the consensus on certain things, or be more honest about whatever. Like, a good example of that is Dublin City Council. People will crib and moan about the hack at the city centre and how it's been destroyed by, no turn here. And now they're going to vote, say you won't be able to drive in at all, and this, that, and the other, whatever. But they'll vote for people who are completely, they don't think about who they vote for in local elections. Like the local authority, the councillors who are elected to Dublin City Council this year, they're referred to as like the grandfathers of the city. These are the people who are going to vote. So think about that when you go out and you vote. Ask the person who knocks on your door, like, be more aware, and ask the person who knocks on your door what they think about the city centre, what's happening to the city centre, where should cars be allowed in, blah, 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 blah. Don't just go, I'm going to vote for this person in protest, but never figure out what they're actually about.
Yeah.
And that goes to national politics as well. Like, we have to be a bit more mature. Like, don't complain that the party that's in government isn't doing things about health when you voted for their local TD because they fixed the road.
Yeah. Well, look, I could talk all night about the voters, because honest to God, Winston Churchill was right about democracy. It's I was the most read story in the Irish Times the other day, at least for part of the day, was about Taylor Swift, and specifically a necklace that Taylor Swift was wearing at the Super Bowl, which had the number 87 on it.
Yeah, I didn't really get this at all. I don't really get it. Like, so Taylor Swift is going out with someone who's playing for a team. Is that
Travis
right?
Kelce? I'll explain to you. She was wearing a necklace with the number 87 on it, because that's the number Travis Kelce wears with the Kansas City Chiefs, who are the finest NFL team of their generation, led by quarterback Patrick Mahomes and head coach Andy Reid, and won a really thrilling Super Bowl last Sunday night. But we're not a sports podcast.
Patrick Mahomes married to someone called Brittany Mahomes?
Yes.
Oh my God, I did know something. Yes. So Taylor Swift is going out with one of the players. So why is that? What's that? So what's that got to do?
Well, because Taylor Swift is the biggest star in the world, or those of us who are sports fans had to put up with basically everything that happened on the field. There was then a reaction shot of Taylor Swift in the stands reacting to it. So it wasn't possible to simply see, the previous play. We also had to wait to see what Taylor Swift thought about it in the stands, see whether we should think it was good or bad.
So
if she was cheering, obviously it was very good. Yeah, I know it's not her fault. I'm not blaming Taylor Swift. And we're on kind of a tangent, because what I was saying, what I was saying was that the most read story in the Irish Times for a period of time on, I think, Tuesday, was the secret behind Taylor Swift's necklace, which has the number 87 on it.
Right. Okay.
And I was thinking to myself, democracy is the tyranny of people who care about stories like that. Like, the majority people are more interested in Taylor Swift's necklace than they are in the kids with scoliosis. That might be unfair to some of them, but I think as a generalization, it's not wrong. And
there's a wonderful episode of The Simpsons where they want to build this monorail. Do you remember this one? And there's some clear problem in Springfield where they need money. They have a surplus, or there's money or whatever. And there's a clear problem that needs to be fixed. And, they're all set on that. And then this like flashy guy comes in and starts convincing them all to build this monorail. And by the end, because he's got a few gimmicks and a few things, they're all chanting monorail, and it's kind of absurd. But I think about that. I know I'm not alone, because I've spoken to other people, but there's a lot of people who have kind of random episodes of The Simpsons pop into their head about different things, and the monorail thing comes into my head about a number of things. Yes. And this is that kind of thing that it's like, we'll all just like kind of get all het up with talking about X when the clear problems are Y and Z.
Yeah. It's a structural problem with democracy, but unfortunately, my calls to have myself anointed as the elected and absolute monarch are as of yet gone unheeded. Maybe someday.
Well, I mean, and by the way, there's been a number of times, in fairness, in the last few weeks that I've been deeply suspicious that there was some kind of far right coup, because the government have started to change all their policies on immigration to things that the far right were allegedly asking for about 6 months ago. So, you never know. Maybe there was a coup. You're just not the leader.
Well, there's really a coup if they cancel Children's Hospital, because we do want to talk about that briefly before the end of the show, because, and look, I am of the view, one of the hardest things,
I think that, like, I admire your whatever resolve or something, but I think it would take huge courage to say at this level of spend, now we're going to cancel this.
Yeah, but it's sunk cost fallacies, Sarah. And this sunk cost fallacy kills you in business, and kills you in politics, and kills you as a country. The idea that we must finish this whatever the cost because we've already spent 2 billion quid on it. I just disagree, because we're for the 2 billion we've spent so far, that's gone. It is gone. We're not getting it back. Whatever happens, it is gone. This week we made an active choice to spend another $500 million, throw another $500 million onto the bonfire as well, in the hope that it will. I mean, we were told this thing be ready in 2020. It's now going to be at least 2025. And I think before 2020, there was talk of being done in 2016. We talked about this on a previous episode.
No, we had this conversation on the podcast before, where we realized that it was actually first proposed in the year where we were children.
Yes.
And now on the current trajectory, it's possible that my first, but maybe more than my first child, will outgrow it.
Yeah. It is extraordinary. And I mean, if you take that 500 million that we're throwing into Children's Hospital today and just use it to fund treatment for children who are actually sick today, I think that is a better use of money. We had the bizarre sight this week of the Minister for Health going on. This is one of my favorite stories of the week. The Minister for Health went on the News at One North Ye and said, this is not the most expensive hospital in the world.
Oh my God, yeah, I love this. Go on.
And it absolutely is the most expensive hospital in the world. If you go on to, there's a Wikipedia list of the most expensive buildings ever created. The Irish National Children's Hospital is by some distance the highest ranking hospital on the list. It is the most expensive hospital, not only the most expensive hospital in the world, it is the most expensive single healthcare facility built by any human being in the entirety of human history since we first stood up and walked out of the pond. It is the most expensive healthcare facility in the history of humanity being built in Ireland. So that's a claim to fame. That's the first thing.
Yeah. But then, now tell him, go on.
So we challenged the Minister for Health on this. They sent his office an email and said, hang on a moment, everyone can see that you're telling fibs. This is the most expensive hospital in the world. So what was his explanation? His explanation, not his, but his press officer's explanation, is that it is not as expensive as it looks, because most hospitals only last 30 to 40 years, whereas our children's hospital will last 80 years. So we're getting twice the bang for the buck. Now, this was on the fly.
It's actually so funny, though. It's so funny. Like, think about the gymnastics that had to be done to come up with that. Like, do you think that the person who came up with that is laughing? I mean, it's like me saying, you're the biggest asshole in the world. And you said, well, I'm not as big of an asshole as this person, because actually I've only been alive for 39 and a half years, and he's been alive for 51 years. So that's more asshole years than me. So he's technically a bigger asshole than me. Like, what are you talking about? The question is cost to build.
Cost to build.
Yeah, it's whether or not it's the most expensive thing that was built or not. Nothing to do with how it lasts. Does it become the least? Does the other one become more expensive if it gets washed away by a flood?
But this is it. But the other thing is, like, the reason that hospitals have a useful life expectancy of 40 to 50 years is nothing to do with how long the building lasts.
Exactly. Or cost.
But do you want to know why it is? Because I went and looked into this. The reason that hospitals are given a 40 to 50 year usable lifespan is medical equipment. Because medical equipment keeps advancing in scale and ability and capability. So if you have a room in your hospital that holds a modern, what do you call those brain scanners? MRI scanner. Chances are in 40 to 50 years, that machine will either be much, much smaller or much, much bigger and capable of much more stuff. And it's not going to fit in that room anymore.
That's got nothing to do with anything.
It does. Actually, seriously, it does. This is why hospitals have a usable lifespan of 40, 50 years, because after that, you're better off knocking them down and rebuilding them to reconfigure them for the equipment of the age, basically. So when we say our children's hospital in the last 80 years, that's nonsense. Unless they're building rooms that will accommodate equipment that hasn't been invented and won't be for 4 decades. So there's an issue there.
But like the chances that the MRI machine is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, like, is kind of absurd for starters. But second of all, like, St. Vincent's Hospital isn't 40 years old. You know, Temple Street Hospital isn't 40 years old. So
no, you're right there too.
Like, these hospitals, I'm actually looking it up here. St. Vincent's Hospital opened when? Like, so anyway, it opened in 1834. Brilliant. So like, it's not really, it's introducing a new criteria to the conversation that's not relevant. The relevant question is the cost of the build. Like, if I say to you, which is more expensive to build, the Empire State Building or another building, it's not whether or not, do you know what I mean? It's not how long it's expected to last. It's the cost of the build. It's a complete criteria in and of itself.
Nobody says that about private houses either. If you said to me, John, how much did you spend on your house? And I said it was, for argument's sake, 400 grand. But then I said to you, but it's grand. We'll be living in it for the next 60 years. That wouldn't make you think, oh, well, that's more or less than you would have spent if you were going to live in it for 30 years. A house costs what a house costs. The same is true of a hospital.
Yeah.
But anyway, this was the line that we are all expected to swallow, that it's not the most expensive hospital in the world because it's going to last for 80 years. So that's where we're at. Some portion of people will buy it, and some portion will use that.
No, they won't. Nobody will buy that. They just hope that barely anyone's listening. That's the only thing I can think of, because that's the stupidest thing I've heard in a while.
Well, it's on the record.
On the day we throw in 500 million more of taxpayers' money onto a sunk cost, as you say, that we're going to say that it's okay because it's not technically that expensive because it's going to last longer.
Yeah. The best bit is, I think that because obviously the new National Children's Hospital is going to be an amalgamation of the two other ones, Temple Street and Crumlin, I think.
Yeah,
Am I right?
I think so, yeah.
And I think the total cost for what we're going to spend, which is about $2.5 billion, I think we're getting a grand total of 2 extra beds. So not only are we building the most expensive hospital in the history of the world, we're also going to accumulate the 2 most expensive hospital beds in the history of mankind.
Sorry, how are you working that out?
Because we're getting 2 more beds than we have now and spending $2.5 billion for the privilege.
How is that? Sorry, what?
So we have 2 hospitals at the moment, Sarah. There are 2 children's hospitals.
Okay, so when they're closed down and replaced by this, the only difference is 2 beds. I mean, obviously, it's not just about the beds.
No, it's not. It's not. But one would hope if you're spending $2.5 billion, given that the population has expanded, and the expanding population was one of the reasons for building a new children's hospital.
Would, yes, John. One would.
One would have hoped we were getting a few more.
One would hope.
Yeah. But we're not. So that's where we're at. That's how the country is being governed, and that was the week.
Let's hope they're given to scoliosis.
Well, that was the week that really was, folks. For another week, we hope you enjoyed the conversation. Sarah and I think, annoyed ourselves over the course.
You just blew me into a rage right at the end of the podcast.
Hold that thought until next week. Anyway, as ever, thank you so much for listening. We really enjoyed, and we do this because we really enjoy the fact that so many of you listen and take value from the podcast. The number of people, Sarah, who come up to me and say that they listen to us because it gives them reassurance that they're not the only people in the country thinking the stuff that we think is really incredible. And that's why we do this, because if you're out there and this is all driving you insane, you are not alone. There are at least 2 of us here who agree with you. So on that happy note, we'll say goodbye, and we will see you next week for another edition of The Week That Really Was. From Sarah and from me, have a great weekend.